We're already disappointed. We see some new spending in different areas, but we know that the infrastructure in our communities continues to crumble.
Tonight, First Nations leaders react to yesterday's budget announcement.
We're river people and salmon people. We've depended on them for...
A Chinook salmon management agreement between the U.S. and Canada has some tribal chiefs frustrated.
All of us deserve this chance to feel beautiful and special and,
And a Métis model from Saskatchewan is set to make their debut on the catwalk. Hello and welcome to APTN National News on this beautiful Wednesday evening. I'm Sav Chonsa. First Nations leaders held a press conference in Ottawa today to give their thoughts on the federal budget that was released yesterday. There is clearly disappointment that this year's budget did not focus enough on Indigenous priorities. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland gave a 40-minute speech on the benefits of the 2024 budget in the House of Commons on Tuesday, but never mentioned the words Indigenous or reconciliation, and this did not go unnoticed by First Nations leaders.
And yesterday, Canadians heard how the federal government plans to spend resources for the coming months and years. Yet this process is marred by a glaring omission. And I was there yesterday to be able to hear, and I did not hear any words pertaining to reconciliation, unfortunately.
Brendan Mitchell is Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief for Newfoundland, who's hoping to see more of a commitment to First Nations in the budget.
I was expecting to see what I refer to as a reconciliation budget yesterday. I'll say it this way. What I expected to see was a reconciliation budget, and we did not see it. I remember being with the Prime Minister in large meeting rooms, at 2 times at least, where he stated that my main or first priority as Prime Minister is into Indigenous people of this country. And I really was hoping to see more.
Last week, the Assembly of First Nations put out a report that says it will take $349 billion to close the First Nations infrastructure gap by 2030. Ottawa does pledge $918 million over 5 years to address Indigenous housing and community infrastructure, but AFN National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak says it's nowhere near enough.
However, analyzing the budget's proposals for housing, policing, roads, and water fall far short of closing the long-standing infrastructure gaps that create so many difficulties for First Nations people.
Mohawk Council of Akwesasne Grand Chief Abram Benedict also says First Nations people can't wait for government to address the growing gap.
We're already disappointed. We see some new spending in different areas, but we know that the infrastructure in our communities continues to crumble. Overcrowding continues to be a reality for a number of our communities. Our remote communities, it's even worse.
APTN News reached out to both the Métis National Council and Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami for comment, but neither were available for on-camera interviews. Instead, both released separate statements, where MNC President Cassidy Caron says she is pleased there's an investment to recapitalize Métis capital corporations, but ITK President Nathan Obed says he's disappointed that there was no money to eliminate tuberculosis by 2030. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
After the federal budget was released yesterday, Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Kathy Merrick gave Canada a failing grade on housing for First Nations people. The Trudeau government committed $918 million over 5 years in new funding towards Indigenous housing and infrastructure. That money is in addition to the $5 billion from previous budgets. However, Grand Chief Kathy Merrick says it's not enough. Assembly of First Nations estimates that over $135 billion is needed to address the housing crisis in First Nations communities. The new investment would contribute to less than 1% of that cost. Other new Indigenous commitments include $1.1 billion for First Nations K-12 education and $1.1 billion toward First Nations and Inuit health over 5 years. Today, the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues entered its third day. APTN News' Angel Moore was on the scene. She reports that identity fraud by self-proclaimed Indigenous groups was a topic of discussion.
I'm here at the United Nations headquarters. The Abenaki Nation of Quebec brought Indigenous identity fraud to the forum. The nation says the Abenaki of Vermont are made up of people who aren't Indigenous, and because of it, their culture, language, and traditions are at risk. Despite that, the state of Vermont recognizes the Abenaki there as a Native American tribe. Isaac LaChapelle-Gill is a youth representative of the Abenaki Nation in Quebec.
The world that watches us will listen to our voice and listen to our plea that the Abenaki, the fraudulent Abenaki nations from Vermont, are not actually Abenakis, that we are the people from this land and we want to claim back that title. We don't want to be replaced, we don't want our history to be reworked and rewritten. We want to take back our place as people from the territory.
Tove Sondel-Gaunt is a member of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. She says the people who attend and say they are Indigenous do it through self-identification, but that doesn't mean the UN extends recognition automatically.
If they say that just being accredited to here and then they say, hey, we are recognized by the UN, I mean, that would be misrepresenting the facts. Huh? Just because you get an accreditation here under the Indigenous organization, Indigenous Peoples Organization badge, it's really not a proof of a formal recognition by the UN.
Taylor Gavin is from the Broken Head Ojibwe Nation in Manitoba. However, she says the UN needs to take some accountability.
Considering the theme of this entire conference is self-determination and enhancing youth voices, we need to start equipping the youth as well with the strength and the courage to be able to ask these hard-pressing questions. And if the UN themselves can't ask these questions, how do we expect the youth to do the same thing?
The side events continue Thursday with the Grand Council of the Crees, who will be paving a way for future generations. Angel Moore, APTN National News, New York City.
A Manitoba judge shot down a motion from accused serial killer Jeremy Skibicki, who claimed one of the 4 murder charges against him should be dropped. In November, Skibicki pleaded not guilty to the murders of Morgan Harris, Rebecca Contois, Mercedes Myron, and a 4th unidentified woman named Mishkode Bijake Ikwe, or Buffalo Woman, by the community. This week, his lawyer argued the charges related to Buffalo Woman should be quashed because there is no body or name to identify her, so this charge is a nullity, meaning it has no legal force. But Court of King's Bench Chief Justice Glenn Joyal rejected the motion. Contois' partial remains were found in the city-owned Brady landfill south of Winnipeg. The remains of Myron and Harris were never found. They are believed to be in the privately owned Prairie Green landfill north of Winnipeg. The location of Buffalo Woman's remains are unknown. Skibicki's jury trial starts April 29th. And we need to take a quick break, but stick around. We'll have more stories when we return. Welcome back. A controversial silica sand mine has been recently approved in Manitoba. In part 1 of this 2-part series, we'll tell you why some community members say it shouldn't go ahead.
When Reg Samard moved to Manigatawgan, Manitoba, he was looking forward to retiring in the woods. He wanted to enjoy the nature surrounding his reserve of Hollowater First Nation.
But I didn't want to retire to having a mine right next door.
In February, Premier Wab Kinew and Environment Minister Tracy Schmidt approved Canadian Premium Sand, or CPS, to extract silica sand in the area 200 kilometers north of Winnipeg. The news came after 5 years of consultations between CPS and the previous Manitoba government, and only a few months after Kinew was elected. During that time, land protector group Camp Morningstar was fighting to be heard.
Really what it comes back to is free, prior, and informed consent. If we had these conversations before anyone signed anything, we would all know where everybody is, right? And by excluding people and not giving them the voice, this adversarial relationship happens. And I had hoped that our government might bring something to the table with that. And that's my biggest disappointment, is to have so quickly after the election to be kind of trampled upon, right? Yeah, that hurts.
MJ McCarran is part of Camp Morningstar, along with Samard and Kateri Sabe Ekwe Phillips. They say the approval went ahead without meaningful consultation between the provincial government, CPS, and their camp, and ignores the environmental review process, or ERP. The ERP says the worldviews of Indigenous people should be acknowledged and incorporated in every project development decision and throughout implementation and monitoring, and that Indigenous Services Canada encourages proponents to engage meaningfully with concerned Indigenous communities, including different groups or subgroups of people within those communities. In 2018, Hollowwater First Nation received $250,000 from CPS to support the development of the project after the Band Council signed a memorandum of understanding with the proponent. Camp Morningstar says this ignored the community's Section 35 rights to free, prior, and informed consent to natural resources projects on their traditional territory. APTN News attempted to reach Hollowwater Chief Larry Barker on numerous occasions, including in person, but he could not be reached for comment. Phillips, who is also a member of Hollowwater First Nation, says the approval is environmental racism.
You know, the system was never put in place to benefit us. You know, it was not our system. It still isn't our system, but it definitely helps them get their foot in the door with our land and with our resources.
Camp Morningstar believes the approval doesn't acknowledge the issues they've brought forward through 2 appeals. They worry about the mine's proximity to ceremony grounds and says there's little to no benefit for the communities it touches. They mention the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, which found there is substantial evidence of a serious problem demonstrated in the correlation between resource extraction and violence against Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people. Work camps or man camps associated with the resource extraction industry are implicated in higher rates of violence against Indigenous women at the camps and in the neighboring communities. Most of all, Camp Morningstar is worried that the mine will have a negative impact on the ecosystem, on the moose who forage in the area, or the medicine plants that grow there.
Our whole community is going to change, and I don't know. It won't change for the better, that's for sure.
APTN News went to see where the mine will go. Upon arrival, nature greeted us with a rare event. 18 eagles were seen flying above and around the exact spot where the mine is slated to go. An unusual sighting for the solitary animal.
Everybody comes here and then they say, oh, now I get it. Because they imagine this as just wilderness, right? It's the old terra nullius. It's empty land, and when we look at things, trees, we look at it as a resource. You know, the birch can give me paper, it can give me sap, it can give me things, right? But we don't think about our relationship with the land.
APTN News reached out to CPS CEO Glenn LaRue for comment on the sighting and how he thinks the mine may affect these birds, but did not hear back. While the eagles still fly high in the sky, Camp Morningstar will be delivering a petition of over 6,000 signatures against the mine's approval to Premier Wabkanu, along with a list of recommendations to revise the environmental review process. Coming up in part 2 of this report, we'll have more on the economic impacts of this approved mine. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A new Chinook salmon management agreement between the U.S. and Canada is hoping to help rebuild dwindling salmon stocks. But as Sarah Connors tells us, some tribal chiefs in Alaska are frustrated with how the agreement was reached. Here's that story.
For Karma Alvey, the chief of Eagle, Alaska, salmon is more than food. It's a way of life.
We're river people and salmon people. We've depended on them for, thousands of years.
Chinook salmon are the heartbeat of the Yukon River, which runs through Alaska and the Yukon. But in recent years, numbers have been in decline because of things like climate change, habitat degradation, and overfishing. That's why earlier this month, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and Fisheries and Oceans Canada signed a new Chinook salmon management agreement. The agreement puts a 7-year ban on Chinook harvesting on both sides of the border so stocks can rebuild.
Many times there are decisions that are made without consulting tribes.
While Alvey supports the agreement's overall goal, she says Alaskan tribes weren't consulted by the state. In the Yukon, self-governing First Nations have a major say on salmon management, but in Alaska, it's largely left up to the state.
I think we were a little disappointed that we weren't consulted on any of these areas of discussion.
So it was kind of just thrown at us, and it was kind of unexpected.
Rhonda Pitka is the chief of Beaver, Alaska. She has questions about a clause of the agreement, which allows both countries to provide limited ceremonial harvest opportunities at their discretion.
To me, that meant that our funeral potlatch subsistence take wouldn't be guaranteed for some of our ceremonies. So that's kind of upsetting.
The commissioner who signed the agreement on behalf of the state could not be reached for comment by deadline. However, a spokesperson for the DFO says both countries have their own ways of defining ceremonial harvest opportunities. Chief Alvey would like to see more collaboration with Alaska on salmon management. She says the time is now for everyone to work together to save the salmon.
We'd really like the wild stocks to come back and be in abundance. Whether or not that's in my lifetime or not, I don't know.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
A Saskatchewan model is making their big debut on the catwalk. We'll have that story for you and more when we return. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Julian experienced some snowfall in La Ronge, Saskatchewan. Turns out Old Man Winter still has some fight before the seasons fully transition. Stay warm and safe out there on the roads. Remember, your photos can be sent to share@aptn.ca to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast.
It'll be 10 in rain in St. John's, 4 and some sun in Charlottetown, 7 in sun in Happy Valley Goose Bay, and 2 in Kuujjuaq, 10 in Quebec City and 13 in Montreal, 17 in Toronto, 12 in North Bay. Timmins will be 11 and rain and 3 in Big Trout Lake. Churchill will be -2 and +2 in Norway House. 3 in Winnipeg and 3 in Barons River. 4 in Regina and 7 in North Battleford. 0 in sun in Stony Rapids and -1 in Meadow Lake. Sun and 3 in Fort McMurray. Sun and 6 in Peace River. It'll be 3 in Medicine Hat and 5 in Edmonton. Vancouver will be sunny and 15 and sunny and 12 in Quesnel. Prince George will be 10, Fort Nelson will be 12. 10 in Watson Lake and 6 in Old Crow. 1 in sun in Yellowknife and 6 in sun in Norman Wells. Colville Lake will be 0 in sunny and 4 in Tuktoyaktuk. Chesterfield will be -9 in sun and -4 in Cambridge Bay. Calumet will be -5 in snow and -26 in Resolute.
A new internship program in Winnipeg is giving Indigenous students hands-on experience in healthcare. Sierra Beddens has the story.
Months ago, grade 11 student Emma Bellick had her heart set on becoming a veterinarian, but shadowing nurses in the labor and delivery ward opened her eyes to a new career path.
I was with a bunch of different nurses who were doing their 24-hour checks on the babies who were just born, and that was like really cool, and just to see all the babies was really cute. And then in the afternoon, I got the chance to be in a room with a lady who was in labor.
Emma is one of several students participating in a 17-week Indigenous student work experience program at the St. Boniface Hospital. The program was spearheaded by Clayton Sandy, a St. Boniface Hospital board member and knowledge keeper at the River East Transcona School Division. Sandy says the program offers hands-on opportunities and experiences that go beyond the classroom.
I dropped in like 3 weeks ago. We have it every Tuesday, a full day, and the students were at the research lab, and they all had a tray with a heart, a pig's heart in it, and it kind of blew me away because they're all cutting it open, stuff like that, and handling it and stuff like that. And yeah, I just thought, how many students ever get an opportunity to do something like this ever?
That experience was pivotal for Matt Talenko, a grade 11 student at Murdoch-McKay Collegiate who hopes to become a cardiac surgeon. He says the program has given him a clearer picture of what he wants to do in the future.
I think my favorite spot is CR5 in the Asper ward, which is post-op surgery, so right after the cardiac surgery happens. And I found that very interesting and it intrigued my interest for what I wanted to become later in the future.
By offering high schoolers on-the-job experience, Sandy hopes the program will nurture future Indigenous healthcare workers.
They're in grade 11 or 12. I'm hoping that many of them will maybe continue into post-secondary into some field that they had an experience to go into here at the hospital.
Now 2 months into the program, Emma sees tremendous value in expanding Indigenous representation in healthcare.
It can be scary for lots of Indigenous people coming here, and it's a very fast-paced environment. And if you see somebody who you can connect with or feel similar to, then I feel like it'd be more comfortable for them.
Sierra Buttons, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A model from Saskatchewan is set to be part of the first annual Santa Fe Indigenous Fashion Week. The part-time model and graduate student is encouraging Indigenous youth to follow their dreams in the fashion industry. Our reporter, Rachel May, spoke with them ahead of the show.
Our diversity is what makes us beautiful. And I feel like especially in the modeling world, we don't think about that enough.
Originally from the Métis community of St. Louis, Saskatchewan, Otakawana Chakos Isquiu is now an international model, gracing magazine covers such as Tribal Art magazine and walking down both runways in Canada and America. Otakawan normally studies anthropology, Native American studies, and geology at the University of New Mexico, but is now heading to Santa Fe to model in the first annual Santa Fe Indigenous Fashion Week. They say that the fashion industry needs more Indigenous representation and that they're happy to see events like this taking place.
All of us deserve this chance to feel beautiful and special and, really be upheld by their community.
When it comes to encouraging Indigenous people to join the fashion industry, Otakawan says it's important to never forget your culture.
I consistently just follow my passions and my dreams, sort of like my ancestors who moved across the land and pursued their dreams and their passions.
The first annual Santa Fe Indigenous Fashion Week kicks off on May 2nd and runs until May 5th. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast for today. For news anytime, please check out our website at aptnnews.ca. I'm Sav Jonesa, and from all of us here at APTN News, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Take care.